So I traditionally wait until we get into October to pull out my Halloween theme for my intros here on videos, but with spooky season kind of already starting to appear, with there already being Halloween events going on, I figured it was time to kind of just open the treasure chest and pull out an old reliable. So let's get into the first film I'm covering as a horror film in spooky season. I'm going to try to use the horror intro, the Halloween intro through all of September and October. And today we're going to be talking about what is supposedly the finale of the Conjuring franchise, which is titled The Conjuring Last Rites. Directed by Michael Chaves, this film stars people like Vera Farmiga, Patrick Wilson, Mia Tomlinson, Ben Hardy, and more. And as I mentioned in that intro, this is the supposed finale of the franchise. It's the 9th installment into the franchise, and I'm assuming it's more of a finale of this era of the franchise because it's most notably a send-off for Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson as Ed and Lorraine Warren, who of course they're playing real-life people in these films, and they've dramatized all of their cases in these movies, and this is supposedly the one that kind of put their career to an end, if you will, the one that they were ready to kind of end it all with. I don't know all the details of the true life story, but that's what this film is selling you on. But I'll say this before I get into my thoughts on the film. Whatever you like about these films, whatever you dislike about these films, the spin-offs, the mainline films, whatever the case may be, one thing that's been pretty solid throughout all of these films, good or bad, has been Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, and this film is no different. It was fantastic to see the two of them together in this film. I think they give great performances together alongside each other, and it is sad to see them go because I think when you look at iconic characters in modern day horror, even though they are playing real life people, I think that their performances and just being a couple on screen amidst the horrors that they face in these films has definitely been a highlight in the world of modern day horror. So with all that said, as usual, let's get into what this film is all about, and then we'll get into my thoughts. The Conjuring Last Rites follows Ed and Lorraine Warren in their final case, the real-life Smurl family haunting of 1986 in Pennsylvania. The Warrens, who are now retired, confront a cursed mirror and malevolent spirit that's in their home, with their daughter Judy and her boyfriend Tony becoming testaments to the familial stakes involved. And I'm happy to start this off by saying I enjoyed Last Rites. I'll be honest though, right out of the gate, I don't think that this film is as good as the first Conjuring film, nor do I think it's as good as the second Conjuring film. And when it comes down to the spin-offs, those have kind of been a mixed bag for me, if I'm honest. I haven't really been a big fan of most of them, with the only one that really stood out to me being Annabelle Creation. But when it comes down to the mainline Conjuring films, I think the first two are easily the best ones, with the most iconography, the most scares, the most creep factor, the best performances, the best cinematography, the best filmmaking. But even though I didn't like the last film that they did as much, I still enjoyed it. I didn't think it was a terrible film, but it was definitely a letdown compared to how good the first two Conjuring films are. And so in the case of this new one, I'm happy to say I enjoyed it more than the last one, The Devil Made Me Do It, I believe that one was called. But I can honestly say though, it doesn't reach the highs that this franchise has had, but it still has a lot of positives. And I want to start off with my positives here because immediately I think that this film is beautiful to look at. In terms of cinematography, you have Eli Bourne behind the camera, who earlier this year also shot the film Companion, which I really enjoyed as well. And I thought he brought a lot to this film. I enjoyed the visual style of this film, and most of this film was just very visually pleasing. I'm a big sucker for good shot composition. I'm a sucker for shots that I can look at and think that would make awesome wallpaper. Just when it comes down to how things are framed in corners, the way things are shot, and this film just has a lot of really great, beautiful looking sequences, and some of the best shots in terms of the creep factors are all because of how these shots are done. So I really wanted to praise the cinematography because that was one thing that consistently was bringing me into the film and how good the film was looking. I will say though, despite all of my praises that I just gave about how good this film looks and how technically sound it is, one element that didn't make sense to me is that you have really good practical effects in the film, some good gore effects in the film at times, and some pretty solid moments of, practical makeup that add to the creep factor for some of the evil entities that we're seeing in the film. but you also have quite a bit of CGI, specifically on this one old woman, haggard old woman that you see in the film. And I just don't understand why they went with this approach. She's so cartoony looking, and she isn't really ever scary. And there are other evil entities you see throughout the course of the film that are all practical makeup, but then you have this just one older woman who is always CGI, and it just was so distracting because she looked so cartoony. You can see it in the trailer, and that was just one element in terms of the rest of the film. It just, like, I don't know, did they just like run out of time there? Was it kind of like an afterthought? I don't really know, but it's so noticeably CGI and so noticeably not a real person that you can't help but kind of just like laugh at how goofy it looks. And it made those moments definitely a lot less scary. On top of that, you also have great performances. I already praised Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, but I'll do it again. They were great in this film. I enjoyed the two of them. I really loved the time spent with the two of them. And all of the gravitas and weight of what's going on here, their family ties, the whole familial element of this film, all works because of them. But of course, I still want to give flowers to the supporting cast, most notably Mia Tomlinson, who plays Judy Warren, the daughter to Ed and Lorraine. I thought that she had a lot to carry on her shoulders in terms of emotions, and of course, similar to Lorraine, she has that ability to tap into the supernatural, so there's a lot of emotional scenes that she definitely has to try to pull off, and I think for the most part, she nails it, and I think she's without a doubt the biggest standout outside of Vera and Patrick. And when it comes down to the supporting cast of characters who are part of the family who are being haunted, all the performances were believable, even from the young kids who gave really believable scared performances, which at times can be a little bit hit or miss depending on the horror film. And outside of that, you also have a film that's solidly edited. It's got a solid musical score I enjoyed as well. And so I would just say in general, this is a technically sound film that looks really good, sounds really good, and is very well performed. And outside of that, I think that this film also has some really strong moments when it comes down to the characters of Ed and Lorraine Warren. All these films have all done their part to kind of expand upon their characters and also give them something that is specific to them in the narrative outside of going to help a family with some sort of demonic presence. And while I do think that this film has some things that hold it back at times, I think the moments that have to do with family and have to do with them were actually pretty engaging and oftentimes had me more engaged in the dramatic side of this film than the horror side of this film. And we're going to get into that in just a little bit. But overall, I can say that this is a very well crafted film with solid performances at the forefront that kept me engaged from beginning to end and ultimately left me in a place where I was never really bored. Now, when it comes down to the scare factor of this film, unfortunately, it does fall into tried and true trope driven horror. I mean, you've seen the scares in this film a million times before. A character looks into a mirror, something kind of distracts them, they look away, they turn back, something else is in that mirror with them. Maybe there's a moment where they're looking at something and something walks behind them. Maybe there's a moment where a character is trying to watch back recorded footage, and if they pause it right at the right moment to see something creepy in that shot. I mean, there was just so many moments that were just traditional jump scare nonsense that you've seen in a million horror films that I'm sure will scare people who are not really big into horror, teenagers and things like that. But for somebody like myself who's a seasoned horror fan, I can't say the film ever really scared me. I'm not going to lose any sleep over this film tonight, but of course there were a couple of moments of jump scares that got me just because you got loud noises and something jumping at the screen. Not all of them got me, but I'd be honest in saying that maybe like one or two of them did get me throughout the course of the film. I won't lie. But yeah, as far as the scares go, I think that there was a little bit more of just a creep factor at times, just an eeriness to the film, an unsettling nature to it. More so than it was actually scary or like actually something that had me like tense while I was watching. It was a little bit more of like I was expecting all of the jump scares. I was expecting all the scares when they happened. I could predict them all, and I think most people will be able to. But for the most part, I think that the tone of the film at least kept things eerie and engaging, but again, not necessarily scary. Now let's talk about the story, because I think this is where you're either going to lose some people or some people are going to be more engaged, and it really just depends on your personal taste. If you've watched the other films, you know that it doesn't usually take too long for the Warrens to get to the family that's being haunted. In the case of this film, it's a little bit over 2 hours, and for a chunk of the film, a big chunk of the film, it feels like two different movies. You have the family who is being haunted throughout the course of the film, and they're struggling with everything that's going on. They're trying to figure out what's happening. They're having weird things happen to them. And then you have everything happening with Ed and Lorraine Warren, most notably also with their daughter, Judy, who is now dealing with, bringing a boyfriend into the mix and wants, her parents to like him. And he's trying to, kind of approve of them. But they're also dealing with the fact that they're no longer doing cases because Ed is dealing with heart issues now. And so there's this whole family situation. There's this whole we got to leave this behind situation going on, but we're also cutting back to the family who's being haunted. And I checked my phone just to see how long we had been into the movie by the time the Warrens actually get to the house of the people who are being haunted in this film, and it was a full hour and 20 minutes on the dot. After trailers and everything, I took into account trailers, an hour and 20 minutes into the film until the Warrens get to the house where the family is being haunted. And so that was a bit of a bummer for me because it just felt like it took a long time to get there. And I don't want to say that it was bad up to that point because it's all well acted, it's all well crafted, it's all well made. The performances are good. There's some, decent creep factor to it. And I honestly think that there was a nice attempt to kind of have like a heartwarming send-off on a family level to Ed and Lorraine Warren, or this iteration of them played by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. There was a nice kind of a focus to kind of focus on their family side of things. But I do think that detracted from the horror movie part of things. And it really isn't until the final 40-50 minutes of the film where you do get a lot of Ed and Lorraine Warren in a evil house with the demons and all that kind of stuff. But then the flip side of that also is that if you've seen the trailers, most of the creepy shots you see in the movie, most of that imagery is all in the trailers. So that's a big bummer as well. So I didn't really feel like I saw a lot of imagery in the film that I hadn't already seen, which was a bummer. Again, it's all well made, it's all well crafted, it's all well acted. So it's by no means a bad time to watch. But it wasn't anything kind of mind-blowing. And again, it took so long for us in a 2-hour and some change movie to get to the meat and potatoes of it that at times it felt like the movie was two different movies, but then it all comes together in the end and is exciting. But I also felt like with the family side of things, the movie never did enough to really integrate you into that family as much in the same way that they did with some of the previous films, most notably the first two, where you feel like you get to understand the characters of those first two movies a lot more. And here, it just felt like, you're seeing moments and there's a handful of characters that are part of the family that we focus on a little bit more, but there wasn't an abundance that was done with them. So with all that said, by the time I got to the end of the film, I enjoyed myself. I did think it was a well-made film that's well acted. It was engaging and entertaining to watch as just a good horror time. But I think when I look at the Conjuring mainline films, I think this is better than the third film in the franchise. I just don't think we've soared back to the height of the first two, unfortunately. And I don't think there's anything about this film that's really going to scare seasoned horror fans. But I think that Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson are great as these characters. I think they're great together. They're convincing. They're compelling. And there's actually a really touching send-off for the two of them that is removed from the horror side. So I think if you're going into this for solely a scary time, if you're trying to take your girlfriend or your boyfriend to go watch something that's going to be spooky and you're going to be all curled up, there's maybe moments that'll happen, but I feel like this movie at times almost feels like it was more so trying to be this like love letter send off to these characters, and more so than it was trying to be like this final big horror film that they're a part of. It's really not until the final chunk of the film that we get that, and it was entertaining to watch for sure, but I don't know if it made for the most overall fulfilling story. But it also led to some pretty fun cameos from the other films. I thought that was pretty fun, including a cameo from James Wan, who I do believe directed the first film, so he was part of starting this franchise and he's been a producer on all of them. So yeah, I think there's a lot to enjoy about The Conjuring Last Rites. By no means do I think this is a bad film, despite my gripes. It's a very well made film, very well acted film, as I've said many times in this review. Sorry for the rambliness. But yeah, overall, when I look at the story, I do think that first hour and some change focuses a little bit too much on a couple of things I don't necessarily think were as integral. I think they could have cut a couple of things out. I do think that there are some pretty meaty elements that are in that earlier part that are central to how the film ends. So you kind of still need a lot of that. But I do think it unfortunately just took a long time for the Warrens to get to this house where the haunting is happening. And it just kind of makes the pacing drag. And then by the time you get there, you got this great big finale. But I'm not sure if it's one of those situations where it's going to end up being just, a little too late for people at that point for it to have like really ramped up. You know, with the early part of the film that worked for people, I'm not sure. So that's going to be my thoughts on The Conjuring Last Rites. So definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. Are you planning on checking this film out? Have you already checked it out? What are you guys thinking? Where does this rank for you in the Conjuring universe of films? And yeah, are you sad to see Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson go? I know I am. Despite any criticisms I've had of any of these films, those two are so good. And I hope that the two of them work together in something else moving down the line, because I think that they just have epic chemistry, and whatever the legacy of these films are moving forward, I think that they are going to be without a doubt the best part about it. So that's going to be my thoughts. Comment your thoughts down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, bye bye.